Welcome to Play Disc, the musical analysis podcast in which my brother and I take a good deep look at one full album per episode. I'm John Porabill.
And I'm Harrison Porabill. And today we're going to be covering, actually, oops.
Go ahead and do it.
I forgot the format.
You can say it. I mean, it's not like we're keeping it secret.
Yeah. And today we're going to be covering Iron Maiden's 1983 album, Piece of Mind. Piece being spelled like a piece of or part of something, because it's clever and whatnot.
It took me way too long to realize that was a pun.
Yeah, I don't want to say it took me a long time, but I definitely stared at it a couple times going, something's not right here, and I don't know what it is.
Before we get into the album, I had an interesting experience this past week listening to a new album, and I was wondering if something like this has ever happened to you.
Huh?
I put on a new album that I hadn't heard yet by an artist that I like. And within mere seconds of the first track, my immediate reaction is, oh, yep, that's exactly what I signed up for. That sounds exactly like what I put on, yes.
I mean, I don't know. It's very rarely that my expectations of an artist I've never listened to are that wildly out of place.
Yeah, I mean, I had listened to the artist, but it was a new album.
Right. And you're just like, yep, that's exactly what I was expecting.
That's exactly what... It was Josh Ritter. Josh Ritter's new album came out last week. It's called Fever Breaks, and it's got this first track called Ground Don't Want Me. And it's one of those things where within the opening, as soon as that drum kicks in, you're like, oh, yep, this is a Josh Ritter song. If you told me, picture a Josh Ritter song, but not any particular Josh Ritter song, just like the platonic ideal of a Josh Ritter song, that's what would have come out of my head.
It sounds like what happens anytime I listen to the Decemberists.
Oh.
I mean, I don't even mean that as a dig. I really like the Decemberists, but they are something of a genre unto themselves.
That's true. And, you know, it's funny, I don't want to sound too disparaging. I actually did like the album a lot, but I'm not 100% convinced that first track wasn't written by a machine learning AI that had been fed the rest of Josh Ritter's songs as input.
Well, you know, for what it's worth, I'm completely convinced that the Taco Bell menu is completely dictated by a machine learning AI that's just constantly reassembling different elements into new menu items.
Okay.
That's not even a joke.
Sure, why not? Anyway, it's a good album, and it's you know, I don't want to turn this into a discussion about a completely different album that just came out, but I will say one of its strengths is that unlike a lot of albums that kind of run out of steam as they continue on, this new Josh Ritter album actually builds interest. It gets more interesting as it goes, which is rare, and it's something I really appreciate.
Huh. You know, I kind of feel similarly about this week's album.
That's as good a segue as any. All right. So, Piece of Mind, Iron Maiden. What's the bio on this album, Harrison?
So, it's 1983. Iron Maiden's made a few albums at this point. I think this is their fourth. And I should say that more confidently.
We're from the government safety place.
Is that a question?
Government safety place.
Yeah, it's their fourth album. And they've had, you know, they're not Spinal Tap, but their lineup has changed a lot for a band that's only been around for a few years.
Everybody knows Yes was Spinal Tap.
Yeah. But yeah, so they've been making albums for a few years, and I would say that Iron Maiden is, they have a sort of carved out a bit of a space for themselves. I think they do have a somewhat distinct sound, even among the burgeoning heavy metal movement that's about to absolutely explode. But they haven't really become Iron Maiden yet. Like,
they haven't become a household name, like a brand unto themselves kind of thing.
And I mean, like, when I say think of an Iron Maiden song, you probably have a certain idea of what that sounds like, and I don't think they've found that sound just yet. I think they've gotten close to it a lot. I think they're dancing around it a bit. And I think part of it is that their lineup never stays consistent enough for them to really gel properly. The other thing I should point out about this album is that this is the final album they did before Power Slave, which is probably their most well-received album. Probably their most well-regarded. Honestly,
Power Slave is the only Iron Maiden album I had listened to all the way through before this project.
Right. Honestly, I would have loved to do an episode on Power Slave, but I don't think I have anything unique or new to say about Power Slave. I feel like if somebody wants hot takes about Power Slave, they can go to a million different places.
I mean, heck, even I've written about Power Slave.
And also, if I'm being honest, basically the entire reason I picked Peace of Mind was because of a single song.
Real quick, before we dive into the thrust of it, you mentioned the iconic Iron Maiden sound, and I know that I picture certain musical qualities when you say that. What do you think of as the Iron Maiden sound?
That's a good question, because I don't really know how to describe music.
If it sounds like an Iron Maiden song.
I don't know. When I think of an Iron Maiden song, I think of layered guitars, basically.
Oh yeah, those either doubled guitars or in some cases,
I don't know.
these doubled guitars, or in some cases the guitar lines are harmonizing with each other, colloquially known as guitarmonies.
Yeah, see that. I mean, I'm not just agreeing with you because you're saying it. You are saying what I'm thinking. I don't know how to talk about music.
Well, first you dance about architecture, and then the rest kind of just takes care of itself.
Gotcha.
And the other element, not just the layered guitars, but I think the other element... This is what surprised me about Iron Maiden when I first sat down and gave them a real fair shake back in 2012. It's not just those guitars, it's the rhythmic quality of the music. They're at the time of Peace of Mind, they have a new drummer, Nico McBain.
Nice to see you.
Take that from the top.
Nico McBrain, and he is the best thing that ever happened to this band. And I think he's really essential to what we think of as the Iron Maiden sound. It's heavy on the toms. He does all these intricate fills on the toms of the drum set. He's fond of varying up the beats. So there's a lot of shuffles, there's a lot of just a little bit off of straight time, both on this album and on the follow-up Power Slave. And most songs will occupy multiple tempos or multiple variations on that beat. Now, having heard two full Iron Maiden albums, I have to say is just, it's one of the cornerstones of their sound.
Yeah. So, I guess I kind of got to ask you something.
Yo.
Can one undeniably great song elevate an otherwise fine but mostly unremarkable album?
Boy, I have got to say there must have been albums that I have heard that the main reason I listen to the album is for one particular song. There's that Australian singer, Washington. She has that song Holy Moses.
Mm-hmm.
The rest of that album's okay. I don't know if it's remarkable, but Holy Moses is like, you hear it and your mind blows.
So I remember when I was a teenager, every now and again I'd hear a song that was like the theme song to a TV show or was featured in an iPod commercial or something, and I'd be like, oh yeah, that's really cool, and I'd type in the lyrics on Google to see if I can identify what the song was, or I'd hear it in a movie or something, especially because it seems like in the late aughts and early teens, needle drop music cues became really big.
Really big.
And, I'd love this song, and I'd listen to it, and I'd try and find the album, and I'd try and listen to that, and it just kind of doesn't work in isolation. And a lot of that has to do with, how my feelings are tied up into whatever piece of media introduced me to that song, whether it be a commercial or a movie or TV show. And, the other thing I gotta say is all of these other albums they kind of have weak or just not great songs, and they have that one perfectly marketable song. But this album...
You want to name names?
Not really.
The Trachtenbergs.
Okay, fine. The Fray.
Costello Music.
Yeah, Costello Music. The Fratellis.
The Fratellis. Oh, jeez, I said the wrong name.
Yeah.
We're going to cut that bit.
He didn't.
Okay, never mind.
I'm going to be honest, I hadn't listened to this album in God knows how many years. I largely wanted to pick it to diversify us outside of our weird little alt-pop-punk kind of thing we fell into as we kept trying to dovetail off of each other's suggestions.
Yeah, we were missing some metal.
Yeah, and I largely picked this album because of a single song, which is really, really good. And if you've listened to this album before, you probably know what it is.
Here's where I would volunteer an absurd guess. But really, I can't even...
I don't think there's a bad song on this album.
Yeah, I mean, you're obviously talking about, scanning the track list, Die With Your Boots On, I guess.
So, I actually kind of like that song just because it's kind of silly.
It is, yeah, okay. It is the silliest song on the album.
It's a patriotic anthem. It's great. It's just kind of ridiculous. And I kind of wonder about that. Because there's nothing bad about this album. I should also take this time to sort of explain my kind of relationship to metal. I'm not like a die-hard metal fan or anything, but I have my particular tastes.
Sure.
Punk, ska, hip-hop, ska, alt-rock, ska. And whenever those get like a little too old or a little too stale, metal is kind of one of my homes away from home.
Your pied-à-terre.
Yeah. I don't know what the Swedish for pied-à-terre is.
That's alright, just wondering that makes you the snootiest metal fan ever.
I thought liking Blackwater Park was what made me the snootiest metal fan ever. But yeah, so it's not something I'll like seek out on the regular, but it's something I kind of use to break the monotony of my own taste. And I really do like it, but you know, it's not my comfort music. So yeah, coming back to this album was a little weird. It was kind of disappointing. I didn't really fully realize how this album figured into Iron Maiden's becoming Iron Maiden.
Yeah?
Yeah, it's largely not great, but fine. You know, it's again, I don't think there's anything bad.
So I have a confession.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to listen to this album 3 or 4 times before I finally made it all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
I'm all about giving everything a fair shake. As a writer and speaker about music, that's kind of my brand. But man, I mean, I was listening to this while I was running. That's my fitness regimen, and I thought this would be perfect music for that, and yet I was bored, I was tuning out, I would turn on something else.
I mean,
Let me tell you my history here.
I largely listen to music while I'm riding my bike for work. And
So,
I gotta admit, just keeping track of what song I was on was sometimes a struggle.
Yeah, I mean, when your attention drifts, the battle's kind of lost.
Yeah.
So, I do want to provide a little bit of context of my own here.
Mm-hmm.
So, in 2011, I embarked on a project that I cataloged on Google+, that illustrious, immortal social media that will never go away and nothing bad will ever happen to. It's off on a farm somewhere, running around happy with all the other social media platforms.
Yep, right up there with Friendster and MySpace and LiveJournal.
And Orkut. Wait. LiveJournal actually is still up.
Yeah, I know.
That's like that Family Guy gag where Peter Griffin lists all the famous SNL people who have died and then ends it with Horatio Sands. Oh, jeez. I embarked on this project and cataloged it on Google+, and the project was, on Google+, I invited everybody who was in my circles to offer suggestions of music that they're into. Actually, you know what inspired this?
I don't fully know, actually.
We were joking off microphone right before we started recording this about how I'm going to throw in a Beatles reference in every episode.
Oh, God.
That's why I just paused and had to laugh, because it was the Beatles. It was reading about all the crazy influences that they were passing back and forth during the Revolver era, where they were all listening to their own crazy stuff and then sharing it with each other. And I was like, that's what I need. I need somebody who's listening to something completely different. It doesn't even matter what it is, as long as they're super enthusiastic about it. And they just need to share it with me, and I'll try to see what they see in it.
John?
Yes? What?
You gotta drop the Beatles as your frame of reference. You gotta get with the millennials and the Gen Z kids. The universal frame of reference is All-Star.
Oh, I thought it was Ray Strummer.
Oh, God.
Ray Shremmerd? Ray I can't pronounce them, but, the Black Beatles.
Yeah. Anyways.
So I did this project, and I thought, in terms of the stated goal of widening my musical frame of reference and getting to experience vicariously some of the things that my friends got really excited about musically, I think that was a major success. And one of the most surprising things about it was that a friend of mine had recommended an Iron Maiden album. He recommended Power Slave. And I didn't know much about Iron Maiden at that point. I thought, oh, they're just kind of a punchline if you need to reach for a heavy metal band for a joke or for
excellent
or to finish out the lyrics in your Wheatus song.
Don't you bad talk Wheatus.
So I was really surprised. I listened to Iron Maiden, and I was really impressed with how melodic and how complex and how compelling the music was. And I wrote about it there, which you can totally find if you just go to the farm where Google Plus is hanging out at and look me up there. But listening to this, I was looking forward to this. You recommended another Iron Maiden album. I hadn't really followed up on that recommendation at all. So you picked Peace of Mind for this podcast, and I was looking forward to listening to it. And I was really surprised at how dull it seemed by comparison. So I actually went back and listened to Power Slave again with fresh ears, too.
What do you think of that one?
I found it very illuminating. Yeah. At first, it was hard to put my finger on it because, I liked Power Slave better. I just did. Where Peace of Mind, I found it really hard to find a toehold. I found it really hard to follow at points because my mind would wander and I would just lose interest. Mm-hmm. And with Power Slave, that very rarely happened. And I attributed it to a couple of things. First, I think note for note, Power Slave has a little bit less Bruce Dickinson singing. I hate to admit it, but he's kind of the weak link in his own band.
Oh.
I think Power Slave has more of the instrumental back and forth between the rhythm section of the band, the drummer and the bassist. It's got a lot more room for McBrain to play around with tempos.
It's a lot jazzier.
It's a lot jazzier, and it's got more of that famous doubled guitar.
Right. More
of that pyrotechnic, virtuosic guitar work, and, more colorful playgrounds for that guitar work to do its thing.
And, it's worth pointing out that Power Slave is the first album they had where they retained the same lineup from the prior album. And that album was Peace of Mind.
Right. And then I told you about this. Mm-hmm. I kind of shared my observations with you from going back and revisiting Power Slave. And what did you say?
So I don't remember exactly what I said, but the basic gist of it was, it's more songs like The Trooper.
Yeah. So it's basically like they took the best song off Peace of Mind and said, more of that, please.
Yeah. And, I mean... so for what it's worth, the one song on this album is The Trooper, which,
Boy, we spent a long time talking around that.
Yeah, I don't know. I thought I was being clever. But yeah, and this is kind of interesting, I think, because I'm not sure how many bands this is true for. The Trooper is... I don't know that there's any universally considered best song for any band, but I would say that the balance on the Trooper is probably a lot bigger than for most other best songs by bands.
There aren't a whole lot of bands out there where the one song most beloved by the fans is also the one most likely to be known by a non-fan.
Right.
One of the only other examples I can think of is the Mountain Goats.
Mm-hmm.
No Children. That's a song that's had a lot of crossover appeal and is also one of the favorites among the fan community for that band.
But I kind of wanted to dig in on this because I was actually worried going into this episode that, because I more or less planned to lean on the Trooper because I kind of think the Trooper is by far the best part of this album.
Were you afraid that it wouldn't hold up?
No, I was worried that I was going to be leaning too much on the notion of can one song save an album. And I thought I might get some pushback from you on that. And when we were talking about this ahead of time, I basically put your words into, it's Power Slave is just the Trooper, just an entire album of it. And that was when I kind of realized, okay, no, we're on the same page here. And I mean, like, the Trooper's not even, like, lyrically, it's not even a particularly complex song. It's interesting, it's powerful, but honestly, I kind of love it when other bands cover the Trooper. Because
I don't know if I've ever heard another band covering an Iron Maiden song.
It doesn't happen too terribly often, but it does. A particular favorite of mine is one done by the Proto Men.
Oh, okay.
Partially because the vocalist for the Proto Men can sing, like, really, 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 really well.
We're on the verge of being kind of mean to Mr. Dickinson.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, I didn't even really notice it until you started talking about it. And then the more I listened, the more I was just like, he can scream. He can...
On the Billy Joel episode, we talked about this concept of, like, showing the sweat.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how hard an artist appears to be trying. I think maybe it's a mismatch within the band because the rhythm section, bass and drums are lockstep. They have this easy chemistry going on. And Dickinson is over there just barely hitting some of those high notes. And it's... I don't know.
And
maybe in a different
for
band.
What it's worth, they seem to have noticed it.
Stuff.
I mean, Power Slave does seem to have a lot less Bruce on it.
At some point, Bruce left the band and they continued recording without him, and then he came back, and then...
I do think Bruce brings
thing.
something valuable in terms of singing. I just don't know that it's necessarily range.
Yeah, I don't know. Wow, I assumed that Dickinson had written all the songs,
Nope.
but kind of doesn't.
Nope.
I mean, he wrote... I'm just looking at the track list right now, and he co-wrote 3 songs and only has solo writing credit on Revelations.
Yep.
Huh. Wow.
Yeah, it's a little weird. I think it's kind of a Rush situation where the principal singer is not the principal writer.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Or like, for peace of mind, where does that leave us, though? Because we've got the album basically leaning on side 2, track 1.
Man, I can only imagine what that must have been like to be a kid in the 80s, listening to this album, turning it over, and just having the Trooper blaring at you. Like, I don't know about you, but I feel like if I had been a kid in the 80s who bought an Iron Maiden album and that happened to me, it would have blown my freaking mind.
That would have been like... I don't know. I feel like sometimes when you're listening to a band, even if it's a band you like, sometimes you're waiting for things to get really good.
Mm-hmm. And
like, even if you're enjoying the album, you know that there's like another level it can get to. And then you hear the Trooper and you're like, this is it! This is what I've been waiting for!
Yeah. And I can only imagine what that was like. So anyways, we've talked enough about the Trooper at this point, I think. We really like it.
So about the Trooper.
But it's not like it's the only thing on this album. Like I said, most of this
That's
album
true,
is
it's
still
not.
fine and serviceable. It's just not remarkable.
Yeah, I mean...
Like, I like Where Eagles Dare. I think it's actually pretty cool. And
Yeah, Where Eagles Dare finally got under my skin. It finally got to me because, having tried this album more times than I successfully finished it, I heard that song a lot.
yeah, and I don't think it's bad. It's weird. There's not much to grab onto.
One of the things, and I kind of wonder about the chronology of when the band worked on these songs, because one of the things about Where Eagles Dare that I noticed listening to it repeatedly is that it has some repeated sections that don't build on each other.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the problem throughout the album, where a lot of the sections are just very repetitive.
So, Where Eagles Dare, and this album has some long track lengths. Where Eagles Dare is 6:08, 6 minutes long. And I'm always cagey when I say this, because I don't like saying that a song is too long. What I do want to say is that I don't think it justifies its length because there are these repeated sections that don't build on each other. There are a bunch of sections where Dave Murray and Adrian Smith are interplaying with Steve Harris and Nico McBrain. I'm just going to have to sing it. This part, it's like about a third of the song by volume, where they just go ra-na-na-na, da-da-da-da, 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 ba-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da.
And I think that's really compelling. It just doesn't build.
Yeah, that's the thing. If they had added some harmony over that line, or if the rhythm had changed every time it had come up, it would justify being 6 minutes long. Whereas listening to it over and over and over again, I'm like, okay, I get it. I get why the fans like it. You want to bang your head to it. It makes me want to keep running.
I kind of wonder how much of this
is...
I kind of wonder how much of this is like the disparity between the concert going experience and the listening to the record at home experience.
Yeah, that's something that's going to come up a lot among tons of different albums that we're going to talk about, because it's true. Like, those are two very different skill sets.
Yeah, I mean, there are some acts I will go to see live whose music I never listened to. The most prominent example for me is Bela Fleck.
Oh, good. I was going to say Bela Fleck. And that's put me on the fence about whether to ever pick one of their albums for this project.
Yeah, I kind of don't want to listen to their albums.
Will I force you to sit down and listen to a Bela Fleck album?
Yeah, that's a bit of a diversion. But yeah, it didn't really click until you mentioned that part about, yeah, I can bang my head to it, but it's not going anywhere. And there's a part of me that's like, I wonder if Where Eagles Dare played really well live when they were touring with it.
I bet it did, and this is also, borrowing from another genre, this is why Freebird is so long, because the audience got into it and they just kept making the solo longer. So when you road test your material like that, sometimes you wind up in a scenario where your songs are kind of dictated by the live audience and not the very different demands of a studio recording.
Yeah. Yeah, and you just kind of get these, and you get these like really technically proficient, well-recorded songs that just kind of don't do much.
Technical proficiency is definitely one of the hallmarks of the Iron Maiden sound.
Yeah.
As I know it, based on this and Power Slave. I mean, this is a tight band.
Yeah.
They are in the pocket. And that's not nothing. That's really hard to achieve at this level.
Right.
They're very professional.
And also, they're kind of breaking new ground, at least at this point.
New ground for them or new ground for metal?
For metal. Metal. I mean, it's weird because, like,
okay.
I don't really think of Iron Maiden as a heavy metal band. Like, they totally are. I'm not gonna like, give you some new hot take or anything, but like, I think of them as more like a prog metal band, or like a proto prog metal band. Like I liken them more to Rush and Yes than I do to Black Sabbath, mostly because of that technical proficiency and that layered musical storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, they kind of want to be a jam band.
Right. Like I said, they're definitely a heavy metal band. Like, I'm not taking that away from anybody. It's just not really how I think of them.
Yeah, okay.
And there's more on this album to talk about. I honestly like Flight of the Icarus. I think that song's like unironically good.
Yeah, Flight of Icarus. I wanted to like it. I think maybe a few more listens and I get
Yeah,
there.
I think it took me a couple times. I kind of bias a bit towards the beginning of the album because the way I listen to a lot of albums, because I'm usually working, I'm usually riding my bike, I have my music player set on repeat, so it repeats all the albums because the alternative is the album stops, I have to keep riding for a bit and then manually start up the album again. And a lot of the time, sometimes I don't notice an album has ended until I notice the opening track playing again. And hoo boy, that happened with this album a lot. I have listened to this album probably a dozen times. I could not even hum a bar from To Tame a Land.
Well, To Tame a Land is intentionally obtuse. It doesn't surprise me.
Like, I didn't know the album was
that-
over until Where Eagles Dare started playing again, because say what you will about Where Eagles Dare, we've said plenty, it has a distinctive guitar riff.
That's true.
Also, I was really relieved when I listened to Still Life the first time, because it was the first time I thought I'd have a song to talk about other than The Trooper. Because despite the weird backmasking that it starts off with, it's actually a really cool song.
Did you look up that backmasking?
Yeah, wasn't it just them screwing around?
Sort of. Honestly, if you play it backwards, it's not any easier to understand because it's Nico McBain doing an impression of Idi Amin.
What? Ooh, said the thing with 3 bones. Good melody thing you won't understand.
Yep, that's
The
right.
gist of it is you shouldn't mess with things you don't understand.
Right.
And it's a jab at the parents' advocacy groups who were accusing Iron Maiden of being satanic.
Yeah, which I know that's a thing that happened. I know that the ritual Satanic Panic in the 80s was absolutely insane. Like, it's weird that we don't talk about that more, to be honest. The level of abuse that children were subjected to by concerned parents repeatedly asking them if they had been sexually abused, and that's just a thing that we let happen and let people get away with.
And that heavy metal music was, through no fault of its own, very intimately
Associated
with this whole phenomenon.
Yeah.
Metal bands left and right were being accused. Ozzy Osbourne, Black Sabbath, they were some big, they were major accusees, I guess. Twisted Sister and
Alice
these are
Cooper.
bands that Alice Cooper. These are bands and artists that hadn't really done anything wrong per se, but because of the Satanic Panic and the hysteria surrounding false accusations of sexual abuse of minors, all these metal bands became, in the public consciousness, indelibly associated with this Satanic Panic stuff, even if they didn't actively court that attention.
And what's really funny is that most Satanists, of whatever stripe you want to call it, would have considered them posers.
I mean, you need Satan more than he needs you.
For these guys, it was an act. It was a gimmick. It was an advertising strategy. To a lot of Satanists, not that people really talked about this in the 80s, and not that anyone should really care, I think they would have imagined it as some kind of cultural appropriation.
Wow, yeah, that's a good point.
Again, not that anyone should care. But yeah, so that's just kind of funny to me, and almost 40 years later, retrospective.
Yeah.
But I thought Still Life was actually really interesting, and I thought Quest for Fire and Sun and Steel built off of each other in a really cool way. Like, I do think the back half of the album's pretty good, aside from the fact that I cannot tell you anything about To Tame a Land.
You can tell me one important thing about To Tame a Land.
Yeah, I can. So, to the geekiest of nerds, you might recognize the line To Tame a Land as being a reference to the Frank Herbert science fiction novel Dune, which the Iron Maiden guys, being giant nerds themselves, were kind of obsessed with.
Yep.
He's the king of all the land in the kingdom of the sands of the time tomorrow. He moves the cyclones and the flamin' in the land amongst the stars of an age tomorrow. He is destined to be a king. He rules over everything in the land of plenitude.
Honestly, when you told me this, it broke the song open for me. It's like, oh, now I get why it is the way it is.
Yeah, that's why there's no consistent rhythm.
Walked without rhythm.
Anyways.
You won't attract the worm.
Right. So, they really loved it. They actually wanted to name the song Dune, and they reached out to Frank Herbert's people. And Frank Herbert's agents responded with a message which stated, and I quote, "Frank Herbert doesn't like rock bands, particularly heavy rock bands, and especially bands like Iron Maiden."
I have to imagine they were heartbroken when they read that.
Probably.
And by the way, just to be clear, I don't think they needed Herbert's permission if they wanted to name their song Dune.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
I'm
but
pretty sure it would have been totally legal for them to just name the song Dune, regardless of what he said.
Yeah, but don't.
But they respected what he
Yeah.
said.
Your friend Will says,
Oh.
"Don't be a dick." But yeah, I do imagine that had to be pretty heartbreaking.
I mean, imagine being told by your hero that he doesn't like you because of who you are, but especially you even among who you are.
Yeah.
Ouch.
Which is kind of a shame because knowing Frank Herbert, I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if he barely ever listened to Iron Maiden.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole point. You don't say that to a band that you've listened to a lot, you know? I mean, you don't say, I don't like heavy metal, and then be able to differentiate between different heavy metal bands.
Right. So yeah, it's a shame. But moving on a little bit from that anecdote, something I sort of wanted to highlight. What do you think the critical consensus about this album was at the time?
Well...
Or do you know already?
That's kind of a tricky question because in the early 80s was kind of the beginning of this schism among rock criticism, where there was criticism from within the in-group, and then there was, like, academic rock criticism. So you could have somebody who's... You could have a rock critic who is a known fan of heavy metal. And I think the metalheads, if I'm not mistaken, were pretty fond of this album when it came out. But then among, like, your just mainstream rock critic working for People or even Rolling Stone,
Just
would have listened
just
to
say
this
Ben
and thought
Fong
it
Torres'
was-
name.
Okay, all right. Point is, yeah, mainstream rock criticism probably was not so glowing about the album. But I think among people who identified as fans of heavy metal in general, and especially people who were already fans of Iron Maiden, I expect this was a huge hit.
It was and still is to this day. Even among heavy metalheads, it is still considered one of the greatest.
Of course.
Pitchfork has an 8.5. AllMusic has it at 4.5. Collector's Guide to Heavy Metal ranks it as a 10 out of 10, which that just weirds me out because like the album is totally serviceable but largely unremarkable.
Yeah, so if they have Peace of Mind as a 10 out of 10, is Power Slave an 11 out of 10?
Right? But yeah, so that's kind of weird to me because there's nothing wrong with the album. It's just it really does make me wonder how much water the Trooper is carrying for the rest of the album. Because I mean, that song is literally the reason I picked this album, and I was largely kind of disappointed by the rest of it. Not even because it wasn't good, just because a lot of it's repetitive.
Yeah, and
like every time the Trooper came on, it was a breath of fresh air.
yeah, and it's that phenomenon I was talking about, where your perception of it might be that the songs are too long, when in fact the real answer is that there's not enough going on in them. Now, that said, there were some things that I noticed, and so first of all, a major theme on this album and in Iron Maiden's work in general is warfare.
Mm-hmm.
Battles especially, like, you know, in the heat of the battle, and I think that's over half of this album is songs about fighting and battles and
Well,
war.
I mean, they're mostly inspired
So-
by epic poems about war.
Yeah, so, well, here's where I find it weird. some of the songs are like an ancient type of battle.
Mm-hmm.
Revelations, Flight of Icarus, if you count that as a battle song, but it's kind of not. Quest for Fire and Sun and Steel, they're early battle. There's sword play. And on Power Slave, there's more of that. There's Flash of the Blade, there's the Duelists. But this album also has more modern, songs about a more modern type of warfare. Where Eagles Dare is named after a famous World War II movie. Die With Your Boots On, that's the one with the gunfire samples in it, right? The Trooper, Trooper is not a word that was in common use until what we think of as modern warfare.
Which is really funny because that's inspired by Charge of the Light Brigade.
Oh, okay. Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
That tracks, and also, wow, what a thing to be inspired by.
Yeah. Dude, they're nerds.
The Trooper is far more inspirational than either the actual Charge of the Light Brigade or the famous poem about the Charge of the Light Brigade.
Oh, take that, Tennyson.
Yeah. Well, someone had blundered.
Get dumped on, Tennyson. I'm sorry.
It's... The thing is, the actual Charge of the Light Brigade and Tennyson's poem are both about a famously bad call. Yep. A famously, ruinously, blunderously terrible military order.
Dude, do you think they thought the Trooper was a mistake?
Oh, do you think Iron Maiden thought the Trooper was a mistake?
Maybe.
It wasn't the lead single, which tells me that they didn't know that they had something special on their hands right
Yeah,
away.
I know, right? Imagine putting out Flight of the Icarus ahead of the Trooper.
I know, but... Oh, wait, actually, I never got to finish that point, which is that I don't think the gunfire theme works as well for Iron Maiden's musical mode. I think when I picture these guitars, when I picture the layered guitars and the shuffle beats and everything that Iron Maiden does so well, it doesn't ring as true to me when they're singing about guns. They got to be singing about swords or magic or something,
It's Iron Maiden's not as good when they're real.
Yeah, that's it. Even the name of the band, it's a medieval torture instrument.
You do know the Iron Maiden never existed, right?
Okay, so it's an apocryphal medieval torture instrument. But the point is, they didn't have Iron Maidens in World War II.
Right.
Hitler didn't use Iron Maidens. Which brings me to my next point, which is that I find it fascinating. Heavy metal is this emblematic genre of masculinity, and specifically this heteronormative 80s version of masculinity. If I'm going to be blunt, it's jock music, but it's also steeped in fantasy lore. So, Quest for Fire, Sun and Steel. To Tame a Land is about Dune. It's about a famous science fiction novel. If we venture outside of Iron Maiden, Rainbow, a famous rock band with Ritchie Blackmore and Ronnie James Dio, and also Dio,
yeah,
the famous rock band fronted by Ronnie James Dio.
And lest we forget Led Zeppelin.
And Led Zeppelin before them. All had lyrics with frequent references to fantasy themes, magic, characters from novels. Led Zeppelin has a song that makes specific mention of Mordor, the land of evil from the Lord of the Rings
Did
book.
you say Mordor?
Mordor, because that's how Robert Plant says it.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I know, it's Mordor. But on the record, Robert Plant says Mordor. Oh, you're
I actually trilled it too much.
Pronunciation nerd me.
Anyways.
Okay.
Don't make me quote the Black Speech
it's
at you.
interesting. It's interesting to me that these guys who were famous and were glorified by sort of hypermasculine culture were doing it by engaging with nerd culture in a way that would not be popular in the mainstream for another 30 some odd years. And I know that this wasn't unanimous. Ronnie James Dio and Ritchie Blackmore famously disagreed over this, and Dio left the band Rainbow because he refused to stop writing about what Blackmore called sword and sorcery stuff.
And I would just like to point out that I think history has vindicated Dio on this one.
Yeah, sure. I mean, he even named his band D10. He clearly played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. Ironically, that's the Paladin's hit die.
I am so ashamed of myself for that joke. Anyway, so it's interesting to me that this tension exists in this super masculine genre that glorifies this sort of beta male fascination with fantasy culture and science fiction.
I mean, you
But
make it sound
it's kind
like
of-
the beta male tendency is also not hyper masculine.
Ooh, I fell into that trap, didn't I?
Yep.
I did not succeed in my role against Check for Traps.
Yeah. There's this a general trend in a lot of contemporary nerd discourse to sort of take for granted that if you are a nerd, you are perpetually a victim. You know, the jocks and the chads are out to get you.
Oh God! Oh, just by saying that word, you have sullied us all.
Yeah, sorry.
You have sullied me and anybody unfortunate enough to be listening to this.
Hey, it's a thing that's
everybody,
happening.
Everybody, pause the podcast. Go take a shower. We'll be here when you get
Yeah,
back.
right. And I think
no, it's true.
there's
and
a
we covered
tendency in
this on
nerd
the Weezer
discourse to
episode.
sort of overlook that. Yeah, nerds can be pretty exclusionary and pretty aggressive and bully-esque.
Yeah, and especially nowadays, as we're nearing the end of the 2010s, and two of the biggest intellectual properties in the known universe are Marvel's Avengers and the Game of Thrones television show.
Mhm.
At this point, nerd culture is mainstream culture, so it's not even really an exclusive thing or something that you can be ostracized for appreciating.
I mean, just look at the change in San Diego Comic-Con from 20 years ago to today.
Yeah. And so I find that interesting, and this is something we talked about when we were discussing Weezer as well. It was refreshing in the mid-90s to have an explicit lyrical reference to Dungeons and Dragons, because that wasn't something that was being talked about in the mainstream culture very much. But at the same time, that culture can also be its own form of exclusionary and also engaged in some of the same kind of toxic masculinity practices, which we also discovered listening to Weezer.
So yeah, it's pretty cool how
And I'm sure-
Iron Maiden kind of seems to embody both sides of that particular largely masculine framing.
Yeah, they've really got one foot on each side of the river here, and I admire them for that. I do. I mean, I'm certain Rivers Cuomo was an Iron Maiden fan.
Probably. I mean, hey,
But
if
anyway,
it weren't for
so-
Iron Maiden, we would not have Coheed and Cambria.
Also true. Do we want to stand on ceremony and even pretend to talk about our key tracks?
Yeah, I was planning on skipping it. It's I was tempted for a bit to throw a spanner in the works and say it was going to be Still Life just because it gave me something else to talk about, but who are we kidding?
Man.
It's the Trooper.
Yeah, it was really tempting. I didn't want to go for the obvious choice. I was really tempted to go with Still Life or Sun and Steel.
It's amazing. You and I liked the same songs on this album.
Yeah, go figure. So I was reading that actually the diehard Iron Maiden fans don't like Sun and Steel very much. It's a little too simplistic for them, I guess.
Sunlight falling on your steel. Death in life is your ideal. Life is like a wheel. Sunlight falling.
Well, it's also short.
Yeah, it's short. I found it refreshing. It was one of my favorites on the album. But when it comes right down to it, I cannot pick the Trooper.
Yeah, I mean, that song is
So-
basically where Iron Maiden became Iron Maiden.
So yeah,
And,
that's a double.
And retrospectively, I kind of feel bad for picking an album where they hadn't really quite found themselves yet.
Oh well, we found a lot to talk about, and that's what's important here. So that's a double. What are we calling it? Bingo, Tetris, Yahtzee, number Wang.
That's number one.
We picked the same key track. Okay. I don't know if we're keeping track that much. Well, I don't know if you're keeping track. I keep track.
I haven't.
We've matched, I think, 3 times.
Oof.
4.
I gotta start second and triple guessing.
Yeah. All right. I don't know about you, but that was about all I had to say about Iron Maiden.
Yeah, had to work a little bit harder than usual to find more to say, but I'm pretty happy with what we came out with.
Yeah. Well, we're still figuring this out as we go.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully our listeners can bear with us. Now, what listeners, right?
Hi, Chase.
Now's the time in the episode. Hi, Chase.
Hi, Adam.
Now's the time in the episode where we roll for our Play Disc Request Lottery. It's the Play Disc Request Lottery. How this works is I have a spreadsheet of requests that have been made by our friends, our patrons, and our interview guests. Each request has been assigned a number from 1 to 99, and I'm going to roll a pair of dice to determine whether our next episode will be covering one of the albums that our people have requested. So,
And according to the law of averages, we've whiffed every time so far, so we're coming up for a good one.
yeah, gambler fallacy. Let's go for it. The spreadsheet is a publicly available Google Doc, which is linked in our show notes. And I am recording on video this dice roll, which we're going to post to YouTube, just to make sure that we're totally honest with you guys, because we like being honest, even when it's awkward and stuff. I have the dice in my hands. It's Iron Maiden, so I'm going with the black dice. That seems appropriate. And are you ready, Harrison?
Yes.
Oh my god. Okay. The ones place is a 2. I'm gonna re-roll because the tens place fell off the desk.
Mm-hmm.
The number is 2. Harrison, I have some news for you.
What is number 2?
We are, for the first time in Playdisc history, covering a listener request. The album, as requested by my personal friend Billy Callis, is King Crimson and their 1969 album, In the Court of the Crimson King. So, in 2 weeks, we're going to cram on this album, and we will record a whole hour of our reactions to King Crimson.
Woo!
You think you're ready for this? I don't know if I'm ready for this.
Well, you'll just have to wait until the future to find out.
Indeed. All right.
I have never done any kind of paying attention to King Crimson before. Yeah, this will be interesting. Tune in next week to find out
exciting.
or tune in 2 weeks from now to see how John and I handle this.
Yeah! Thank you for hanging with us this far. We really appreciate you guys listening. I want to thank our good friend Ben Wright Human for providing promotional art for us. You can find more of his work at bwhcomics.com if you like. Ben also supports us on Patreon, along with Vita Porabil, Chase DeMonte, and Adam Herchak. We're extremely grateful for all their support, and listeners, if you'd like to join them in supporting us, you can visit patreon.com/playdiscpodcast to make a monthly contribution. It's completely optional, but if you do donate, we'll read your name at the end of each episode, and we'll give you access to benefits such as an entry into the request lottery that we just drew from, and having your voice added to the opening theme song chanting, "Play Disc!" If you can't afford to support us, there are other ways you can help us out. You can share our episodes on social media. You can go to whatever application you listen to our show on and leave us a rating or a review. If you could give us a 5-star rating, if you like us that much, that'd be great. If you don't like us that much, lie and give us 5 stars anyway. It really helps. Another thing that you get if you donate to us is access to a library of bonus episodes where Harrison and I discuss movies about music. We've done Pitch Perfect, we've done Idlewild, and a third that at time of recording we haven't decided yet, but I think might be settled by the time this goes up. We'll figure it out.
Okay.
If you want to email us, we're not hard to find. Our email address is playdiscpodcast@gmail.com. We're also on Facebook under the name Playdisc Podcast, on Twitter and Instagram as @PlaydiscPodcast. I hope you join us in 2 weeks for our discussion on King Crimson. But until then, catch you on the B-side. Yes!
And now, a quick word on copyright.
Today's episode used clips from several songs by Iron Maiden, namely Where Eagles Dare, The Trooper, and To Tame a Land, written by Steve Harris, Still Life, written by Harris and Dave Murray, Sun and Steel, written by Adrian Smith and Bruce Dickinson, and Die With Your Boots On, written by Harris, Smith, and Dickinson. The rights to the recordings of these songs are owned by Universal Music Group. We also used a short clip from Ground Don't Want Me, written and performed by Josh Ritter, with rights owned by Pythias Recordings, and from You Need Satan More Than He Needs You, by Future of the Left, with lyrics by Andrew Falkus and rights owned by Beggars Group. We've used these short clips for purposes of commentary without formal licensing, as allowed under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976, also known as fair use.
The Playdisc theme song and Playdisc Request Lottery theme were written and recorded by me using my stage name John Eric. All other aspects of the Playdisc podcast are jointly owned by myself and Harrison Porbill. The podcast and associated original songs are all licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike 4.0 international license.
Play disc!